The server logs were scrolling in a hypnotic green cascade across my third monitor, a silent testament to a system working exactly as designed. Every new user sign-up, every completed session, every micro-interaction within the app was a tiny, satisfying pulse of light. Aura, my creation, my obsession, my vindication. It was an AI-driven mental wellness platform, designed to provide personalized cognitive behavioral therapy exercises, guided meditations, and mood-tracking analytics. The tech world called it revolutionary. My family called it my little computer game. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the worn leather sighing under my weight, and took a sip of cold coffee. My office, a converted loft in the city's burgeoning tech district, was a monument to minimalist design and functionalism. White walls, polished concrete floors, a single, thriving fiddle-leaf fig in the corner named Hal. This space, this company, this life, had built it all from scratch. I had built it not just with code and caffeine, but with a stubborn refusal to listen to the people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters. My mind drifted back to a specific Sunday dinner 3 years ago. It was the day I'd announced I was dropping out of my prestigious MBA program to pursue Aura full-time. I had a prototype, a passionate pitch, and a naive hope for their blessing. My father, Richard Croft, a man who viewed life through the stable, predictable lens of a balance sheet, had set his fork down with a deliberate click. "So let me get this straight," he'd said, his voice laced with a weary disappointment that was worse than any anger. "You're quitting a Tier 1 business school to make an app? To help people with their feelings?" My older brother Mark, ever the golden child, a newly minted corporate lawyer with a condescending smirk permanently etched on his face, had chimed in. "It's a tough market, Jules. There are a million meditation apps out there. What's your unique value proposition? Your defensible moat?" He used business jargon like a weapon, designed to make me feel small and unprepared. "It's not a meditation app, Mark." I tried to explain, my voice tight. "It's a dynamic AI that learns the user's cognitive patterns and it's Silicon Valley nonsense." My father interrupted, shaking his head, chasing venture capital pipe dreams instead of getting a real job. Accounting, lewe, something tangible, something safe. My mother, a woman whose love was expressed through a constant low-grade anxiety, used rooney hair hens. "Oh, Julian, are you sure? It sounds so risky. What about your future?" They laughed, not a cruel laugh, but a soft, dismissive chuckle. The kind of laugh you give a child who says he wants to be an astronaut. It was the laugh of people who had already decided I would fail. I never showed them my pitch deck again. I never asked for their advice. I never mentioned Aura at a family dinner unless they brought it up, which they rarely did. I just went to work, and I succeeded. Wildly. A new notification pinged on my screen, shaking me from the memory. Forbes 30 under 30. My marketing lead had just sent the confirmation email. I was on the list. It was a moment I had dreamed of, a validation from the world I had fought so hard to enter. I should have been ecstatic. I should have been popping champagne. Instead, I just felt a familiar, hollow ache. The approval of strangers was loud, but the silence from my own family was deafening. My phone buzzed, jarring me from my reverie. The caller ID read Mom. My mother only called me during the workday if something was wrong. Her anxiety-fueled imagination usually meant a minor issue was treated like a 5-alarm fire. I braced myself for a lecture about a news article. She'd read on the dangers of blue light from computer screens. "Hi, Mom, what's up?" I said, trying to sound casual. "Julian?" Her voice was a choked whisper. "Teen and Breatley." "Oh, Julian." She was crying, not her usual worried tears, Buta Depp. ragged sobbing that sent a spike of pure ice through my veins. Mum, Mom, what is it? What's happened? It's your father, she sobbed. It's Mark, it's everything. Everything is gone. What are you talking about? Where are you? I was already on my feet, grabbing my keys, my mind racing through a dozen terrible scenarios. Car crash? Heart attack? We're at the house. She managed to get out between gasps. Your father, the firm. There was a client, fraud, and now they're saying Mark. Oh, Julian, they're going to lose everything. The house, the business, everything we've ever worked for. We need you. Please, you have to come home. We need you. The 3 words she had never said to me in my entire professional life. The irony was so thick, so bitter I could taste it. They hadn't needed me when I was building my dream. They hadn't needed my vision or my passion. But now, standing in the wreckage of their own safe world, they needed my checkbook. The family who had laughed at my business idea was now calling me to bail them out. The drive to my parents' house in the suburbs was a surreal journey back in time. Every exit on the highway, every familiar landmark, pulled me further from the man I had become and closer to the boy I had been. The boy who was always trying to explain himself, always trying to fit his round-peg dreams into their square-hole expectations. The Croft family home was a handsome colonial, a brick-and-mortar symbol of my father's life, philosophy, prudence, stability, and quiet conformity. It was the house I grew up in, the place where my ambitions were born and then politely discouraged. As I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was the conspicuous absence of my father's Mercedes. In its place was Mark's sleek, aggressive-looking BMW parked at a haphazard angle as if he'd slammed on the brakes and run inside. A bad sign. The front door opened before I even reached it. My mother stood there, her face pale and puffy, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked 10 years older than she had at Christmas. She threw her arms around me, clinging to me with a desperation that felt foreign. My mother's hugs were usually light, airy things, not this full-body vice grip. Oh, Julian, thank God you're here. She whispered into my shoulder. I walked into the house, a place that had always smelled of lemon polish and my mother's Popio. Today, it smelled like a fair. My father was sitting in his favorite leather armchair in the living room. But he wasn't reading the Wall Street Journal or watching the news. He was just staring at the blank television screen, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table beside him. He looked, defeated. The imposing patriarch of my childhood had vanished. Mark was pacing in front of the fireplace, his tie loosened, his hands running frantically through his perfectly styled hair. He was radiating a toxic mix of panic and anger. He stopped when he saw me, and his expression hardened. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, as if I were an intruder. "Mark, stop it," my mother pleaded. I called him. "I'm here because Mum said there's a problem," I said calmly, directing my words to my father. "What happened?" My father didn't answer. He just continued to stare at the blank screen. It was Mark who spoke, his voice dripping with resentment. Dad's biggest client, a construction developer, was a complete sham, a Ponzi scheme. He'd cooked his books for years and now he's vanished, disappeared, and he took half of his investors' money with him. "Okay," I said slowly, processing. "So Dad loses a client, that's bad, but you don't get it, do you?" Mark spat, his voice rising. "Dad was his accountant. His firm signed off on the audits for 5 years. 5 years of fraudulent documents. The investors are suing everyone. The developer, his partners, and his negligent accounting firm. They're saying Dad either knew or was too incompetent to see it. They're going to strip the firm down to the studs. I looked at my father, who flinched at the word incompetent. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "And what's your part in this, Mark?" I asked quietly. Mark's jaw tightened. I did some contract work for the developer. On Dad's recommendation, the plaintiffs are naming me in the lawsuit as a co-conspirator. They're filing a complaint with the State Bar. They're trying to say I helped draft the contracts that made the fraud possible. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my father's reputation, his life's work. And it was about my brother's entire career. Disbarment was a professional death sentence for a lawyer. "We're going to have to declare bankruptcy," my mother choked out, sinking onto the sofa. "The lawyers said the firm's insurance won't cover fraud or gross negligence. Our personal assets are tied to the business. They can take the house, their savings, everything." She finally broke down completely, burying her face in her hands. I looked around the room at the three of them. My defeated father, my hysterical mother, my hostile, terrified brother, the people who had built their lives on the bedrock of safety and security, now watching it all crumble into dust. And they were all looking at me / not with pride, not with love, but with a desperate, hungry expectation. The power dynamic in the room had inverted so completely it was dizzying. I was no longer the foolish son. I was the lifeboat. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to let them on board. I left my parents' house with a vague promise to look into things, a non-committal phrase that seemed to momentarily placate my mother, but only deepen the scowl on Mark's face. I drove not to my own apartment, but to my office. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I was in complete control, a stark contrast to the chaotic despair I had just left behind. The city lights twinkled below, a sprawling galaxy of other people's lives. I wondered how many of them were facing their own private apocalypses tonight. I stood by the large window, replaying the scene at the house. My father's silence was the most damning part. He was a man of action, of solutions. His catatonic state told me everything I needed to know. He was out of options. He was checkmated. I did the only thing that made sense to me. I called Maya. Maya was my co-founder, my CTO, and the pragmatic, skeptical yin to my creative, idealistic yang. She was the first person who had looked at my plan for Aura and said, "This is ambitious as hell, but the logic is sound." We had built the company together, and she knew me better than my own family. She answered on the second ring. "You're still at the office. I thought you were celebrating the Forbes list." "Change of plans," I said, my voice flat. "My family's world just imploded, and I've been drafted as the one-man FEMA." I told her everything. The Ponzi scheme, Tenegligan audits, Mark's legal jeopardy, the impending bankruptcy. She listened patiently, without interruption, a skill that made her a brilliant coder and an even better friend. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "Wow," she said softly .. "So the prodigal son with the silly little app is now the only one with a parachute. The irony is so thick I'm choking on it." I admitted ... "What are they asking?" "For?" she asked, her tone shifting into business mode. "They didn't say the number," I replied, "but based on what they described, we're talking 7 figures. Minimum. Enough to settle the lawsuits, keep the firm from dissolving completely, and pay Mark's legal fees. It's a lot. It's more than a lot, Jules," she said, her voice sharp with concern. "That's a significant portion of your personal liquidity. We have a burn rate to maintain. We have payroll. You start pulling that kind of money out of your accounts, it makes our financial position look weaker. It could spook our investors if they ever found out." "I know," I sighed, running a hand over my face. I know all of that. But what am I supposed to do, Maya? Let my parents end up homeless? Let my brother get disbarred over this? The brother who called your company a house of cards at our launch party. She reminded me gently but firmly. The father who told you to get a real job? Jules, I know they're your family. But love and business don't mix. And this is a business decision. A very, very bad one. You'd be investing in a failing enterprise with no hope of a return, run by people with a proven track record of giving you terrible advice. She was right. Every logical bone in my body screamed that she was right. It was a terrible investment. But as I stared out at the city lights, I saw my mother's tear-streaked face, my father's empty eyes. This wasn't about ROI. It was about something far more complicated. I have to do something, I whispered. Okay, Maya said, sensing she couldn't argue me out of it. Okay, then you don't do it as a son. You do it as an investor. You don't just hand them a blank check based on a hysterical phone call. You do your due diligence. You hire your own people, a forensic accountant, a top-tier lawyer who works for you, not them. You get the real, unvarnished truth of how bad this is. You treat this like you're considering acquisition of a toxic asset. You get all the data, and then you make a decision based on facts, not feelings. Her words cut through the emotional fog. Data, facts, due diligence. This was my language. This was my world. It was a way to engage with the problem on my own terms, in my own arena. It wasn't just a bailout. It was a strategic intervention. You're a genius, Maya, I said, a wave of clarity washing over me. / I know, she said. / That's why you pay me the big bucks. Now get out of the office and get some sleep. You're going to need it. This is going to get ugly. She was right about that too. Approaching my family with a team of lawyers and accountants wouldn't be seen as prudence. It would be seen as a power play. A hostile takeover of their own failure. It was the right move, the only move, and it was going to start a war. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and emails. I moved with the same focused intensity I had when we were closing our first round of funding. This was a problem to be solved, a system to be analyzed. It was the only way I could keep the messy, painful emotions at bay. Following Maya's advice, I didn't call my family. I engaged a lawyer first. Not just any lawyer, but a notoriously sharp litigator named Isabella Rossi, who specialized in complex financial fraud. One found her through a high-level contact, and our first meeting was in her glass-walled office overlooking the bay. Let me understand this, she said, her steepled fingers tapping lightly on her marble desk. You want to potentially fund a settlement for a case in which your own brother is a named party, and your father's firm is the primary target. And you want to do this out of your personal funds. That's the general idea, I confirmed. She leaned back, her gaze analytical. This is a terrible idea, Mr. Croft. So I've been told, I said with a wry smile, but they're my family. Family is the oldest reason in the book for making terrible decisions. She countered smoothly. .. But if you're determined to do it, you'll do it my way. We proceed with extreme prejudice. We conduct a full independent audit of your father's firm and all associated accounts. We hire our own forensic accounting team. I use the best, and they will dig into every transaction for the last 7 years. We find out exactly where the bodies are buried before we even think about writing a check. You will have no direct contact with your family regarding the case. All communication will go through me. Is that understood? Understood, I said. It was exactly what Maya had recommended, only with more expensive shoes. .. Good, she said. .. Because from where I'm sitting, you're not just bailing out your family, you're protecting your own assets from being dragged into their mess. We'll frame it as a potential investment, a restructuring. It sounds better than a rescue mission. The call to my father to explain this was one of the hardest I've ever had to make. I kept it brief, clinical. Dad. I've decided to look into helping. But to do that, I'm bringing in my own team to assess the situation. They'll need full access to all of the firm's books. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. You're auditing me? He asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and profound insult. I'm doing my due diligence, I replied, using Maya's phrase. It's the only way I can move forward. I see, he said, his voice cold and distant. You don't trust me. This isn't about trust, Dad. This is about understanding the full scope of the financial and legal exposure. My lawyer, Isabella Rossi, will be in touch to coordinate with your legal team. I hung up before he could argue further, my heart pounding. The first shot in the war had been fired. The reaction was swift. Mark called me within minutes, absolutely livid. Are you insane? He yelled into the phone. You're sending your attack dogs to go through Dad's life's work, after everything he's done for you. What he's done is get himself into a mess that's threatening to take you down with him. I shot back, my patience wearing thin. I'm the only one offering a way out, Mark. And this is how it has to be done. So tell your lawyers to expect a call from Ms. Rossi. And I suggest they cooperate. I hung up on him, my hand shaking slightly. This was so much harder than I had anticipated. The emotional toll was immense. I spent the rest of the day looking at old family photos on my phone. Me and Mark as kids. Greening wheat missing Ted. My father teaching me how to ride a bike, his hand steady on the back of the seat. Where did that all go? Was there any of that left? That evening, I found myself staring at the Aura user dashboard. A thought struck me. I searched our anonymous user database for demographic profiles that matched my father's, age 60 to 65. Melee, professional services, suburban. I found over 1,000. I looked at their aggregated, anonymized mood data, high levels of stress, anxiety, feelings of being overwhelmed. These were men like my father, carrying the weight of their worlds on their shoulders, terrified of showing weakness. He had laughed at my idea. He had called it nonsense, but here, in Tedete, was the undeniable proof that he, and men used Likihim, were exactly the people I had built Aura for, people who needed help but didn't know how to ask for it. For the first time, a flicker of something beyond anger or pity stirred in me, a flicker of empathy, and it made everything so much more complicated. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in hostile silence. My family communicated, with me only through their lawyers, the exchanges curt and formal. Meanwhile, my team, led by the formidable Ms. Rossi, descended upon my father's life's work like a swarm of locusts. The forensic accountants, a pair of unerringly sharp individuals named Dable and Hernandez, set up a temporary war room in a vacant office I leased for them. They were surgical, unemotional, and utterly thorough. I tried to focus on Aura, on the upcoming launch of our 2.0 version, but the family crisis was a constant low-level hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. It was a background process that was eating up all my emotional bandwidth. I agreed to have lunch with Mark, a meeting brokered by our mother in a desperate attempt to get us talking again. We met at a neutral ground bistro halfway between my office and his law firm. He looked haggard, the stress carving new lines into his face. Your people are tearing the firm apart, he said before the waiter had even brought us water. They're treating Dad like a criminal. They're trying to figure out what happened, I countered, keeping my voice even. Something you and Dad were less than forthcoming about. We need the truth, Mark. The complete truth. Not the edited for my benefit version. There's nothing to tell, he insisted, sifting in his set. Dad got duped by a charismatic con man. It happens. He was negligent. That's it. Is it? I asked, looking him directly in the eye, because the initial reports I'm getting suggest that the client's books were so obviously fraudulent that a first-year accounting student should have spotted them. The negligence was extreme, almost willful. He flinched, a barely perceptible tremor. Dad's old school. He trusted the guy. They golfed together, for Christ's sake. The law doesn't care about golf, Mark, I said. This isn't just about saving Dad's firm anymore. It's about saving you, Rossi. Tells me the plaintiffs have evidence that you drafted contracts that created shell corporations for the developer. Is that true? He took a long sip of water, his knuckles white around the glass. I was providing a service to a client. It was standard legal work. Was it? I pressed ... or were you helping him hide money? Because if it's the latter, and you knew about it, this goes way beyond negligence. This is conspiracy. And if that's the case, there is not enough money in my bank account to make it go away. His composure finally cracked ... You think I wanted this? He hissed, leaning across the table. You think I enjoy watching my life circle the drain? You waltz in with your tech bro money and your army of lawyers, acting like you're some kind of savior. You have no idea what this is like. The partners at my firm are already treating me like a leper. Dad hasn't slept in weeks, but you wouldn't know anything about that kind of pressure, would you? You've been too busy playing with your app. The old resentment, the old dismissal of my work. It was still tear, bubbling just under the surface of his desperation. My app, as you call it, is the only reason you're not already selling this Rolex to pay your legal bills, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It's the only thing standing between Dad and total ruin, so you can drop the attitude and start being honest with me. Or you can handle this on your own. Your choice. He stared at me, his jaw working silently. The food came, but neither of us touched it. The chasm between us had become too wide to bridge with small talk and overpriced salads. We were no longer brothers, not really. We were two deeply suspicious parties in a high-stakes negotiation, and one of us was hiding something. I left the restaurant with a sick feeling in my stomach. The problem wasn't just the con man who had disappeared. The problem was sitting right in front of me. The call came a week later. It was from Rossi. Her voice was clipped, all business. Jules, we have a problem. A big one. The preliminary report from Gable and Hernandez is on its way to your inbox. But I wanted to give you the heads up. How big? I asked, my hand hovering over my mouse. Your brother is a liar, she said bluntly. And your father has been covering for him. My heart sank. I opened the email. It was a 50-page PDF filled with spreadsheets, timelines, and damning analyzers. I skipped to the executive summary. The forensic accountants had unearthed a series of wire transfers from the developer's fraudulent accounts directly to a holding company. A holding company controlled by one person, my brother, Mark Croft. The story the data told was sickeningly clear. Mark hadn't just been a tangential player who drafted a few contracts. He had been an active participant. He had a gambling problem, a secret he had kept hidden for years. He was in deep owing money to some very unsavory online bookies. The developer had found out and had used it as leverage. He'd paid off Mark's debts, and in return, Mark had become his personal lawyer, creating the complex web of shell corporations and contracts that made the Ponzi scheme so difficult to unravel. He wasn't just negligent. He was compromised. He was an accomplice ... I didn't turn around. I wouldn't let them see the conflict on my face, because as cold and clinical as I had tried to be, this was tearing me apart. This was my family, and I was systematically dismantling them. But it was necessary. It was like surgery without anesthesia. Painful, brutal, but the only way to cut out the cancer of lies and denial that had been poisoning us for years. Maya was right. I had to treat it like a business decision. And the business of the Croft family was toxic, on the verge of total collapse. My plan wasn't just a punishment. It was a forced restructuring, a hostile but necessary takeover to prevent total liquidation. Finally, my father spoke my name. Julian. His voice was different. All the bluster. Alta Preed. All the paternal authority was gone. It was just the voice of an old, tired man. I turned around slowly. They were all looking at me. My mother's face was a mess of tears. Mark was staring at the floor. His shoulders slumped and defeat. My father was holding the single-page document with my terms. His hand was trembling slightly. "We'll do it," my father said, his voice barely audible. "We'll agree to your terms." Mark's head shot up, a final protest on his lips, but my father silenced him with a look. It was the first time I'd seen him truly act like a father in this whole ordeal, taking control, making to head, necessary choice for his wayward son. "But I want you to know," my father continued, looking me straight in the eye. "I want you to know that I was always proud of you. I just didn't understand your world. It scared me. And when people are scared, they do stupid things. They say stupid things." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry, son, for everything." It wasn't the grand, cinematic apology I might have once fantasized about. It was quiet, broken, and delivered in a moment of utter humiliation. But it was real. It was the most honest thing he had said to me in a decade. I simply nodded, unable to speak. Mark said nothing. He just walked to the desk, picked up the pen, and signed the confession and the agreement. His signature, usually a confident scrawl, was tight and barely legible. My father signed his copy. It was done. The deal was closed. I made the call to Rossi. "They've agreed," I said. "Execute the plan." The weeks that followed were a flurry of legal and financial activity. Rossi and her team moved with terrifying efficiency. The civil settlements were negotiated and paid. The blind trust was established. My father's firm was dissolved. With quiet dignity, Mark checked into a rehab facility in Arizona. My mother was left to rattle around in the big house. Her life irrevocably altered. I didn't see them during that time. It was all handled through intermediaries. It was cleaner that way. I poured myself back into Aura, working with a focus I hadn't had in months. We launched version 2.0 to stellar reviews. User engagement skyrocketed. We were helping people. It was tangible. It was real. One evening, about a month after the meeting in my office, my father called me. "The first statement from the trust manager came today," he said. His voice was calm. "He seems like a very competent man." "He is," I said. "I've been reading about your app," he continued, a little awkwardly. "The articles, Pereviers. It's impressive. What you've built. Truly." "Thanks, Dad," I said. "I was wondering," he said, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "I was wondering if you could show me how to download it." I closed my eyes. It wasn't a bailout. It wasn't a surrender. It was a beginning. A fragile tentative. An uncertain beginning. "Of course, Dad," I said, a small smile touching my lips for the first time in a long time. "I'd love to." I knew things would never be the same. The old family dynamic was gone forever, shattered into a million pieces. But maybe, just maybe, what we built in its place would be something smaller, quieter, but infinitely more honest. And as I looked at the glowing screen of my own creation. I realized I hadn't just bailed out my family. I had emancipated myself. And for the first time, I felt truly, completely free. And my father? He had discovered it. Not when the whole thing imploded, but almost a year ago. He'd found evidence of Mark's gambling and the payoffs. And instead of exposing it, he had tried to handle it in the family. He'd confronted Mark. Here had been a terribly figured, and my father had made a catastrophic decision. He'd chosen to protect his son over his avarice, professional ethics. He'd kept signing off on the fraudulent audits, hoping the problem would somehow magically resolve itself. He had knowingly allowed the fraud to continue, all to stop his golden child from falling. I felt nauseous. The entire narrative they had spun for me, the story of a trusted client and a simple, tragic case of negligence, was a complete fabrication. A lie designed to manipulate me into saving them from a disaster they had actively created and concealed. My brother's greed and my father's pride had set this fire, and they had left it to burn, hoping it wouldn't spread. I picked up the phone and called Rossi. What does this mean legally? It means this is no longer a civil matter of negligence, she said, her voice grim. This is criminal, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering. If this report ever sees the light of day, the day would have a field day. Your father would be disbarred and likely face jail time. Your brother would be disbarred and would certainly go to prison. I hung up the phone and walked over to my office window. The city below seemed distant, unreal. All my life, I had felt like the black sheep of the family, the reckless one, Tedrami, the one who didn't understand the value of safety and security. But I had never lied. I had never cheated. I had never compromised my integrity to get what I wanted. The people who had lectured me on responsibility and prudence, the men who had mocked my ambition, were common criminals. Their entire world, the one they held up as the gold standard, was built on a foundation of lies and secrets. My anger was a cold, clear flame. It burned away all the lingering guilt, all the misplaced familial duty. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a damage assessment. And I was the only one left standing who wasn't covered in filth. The question was no longer how I could save them. The question was, did I even want to? The confrontation was inevitable. I scheduled it myself, not at their house, not at a neutral location, but in my office. On my turf, I told my mother. I had the results of the audit, and we needed to have a final family meeting to discuss my decision. She agreed eagerly, her voice full of a pathetic, misplaced hope. They arrived together, a united front of desperation. My father looked gaunt. My mother's face was a mask of strained optimism. And Mark had the look of a man walking to his own execution. He knew I knew. He must have known that a team as good as Rossi's would find everything. I didn't ask them to sit. I remained standing behind my large glass desk, the 50-page report lying between us. I have the final report from the forensic accountants. I began, my voice devoid of emotion. It makes for some interesting reading. Julian, please. My mother started. If it's about money, it stopped being about money a long time ago, Mom, I said, cutting her off. I fixed my gaze on Mark. It's about a secret gambling addiction. It's about payoffs from a con man. It's about being blackmailed into becoming an accomplice to a massive fraud. Mark flinched as if I'd struck him. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Then I turned to my father. And it's about a father who discovered his son was a criminal and decided to cover it up. It's about signing off on fraudulent audits for almost a year, violating every professional and ethical code you claim to live by, all to protect the family name. My father visibly deflated, sinking into himself. The truth spoken aloud in this sterile, unfamiliar room had finally crushed him. The story you told me was a lie, I continued, my voice like ice. A carefully constructed fiction, designed to get my money. You didn't come to me for help. You came to me for a cover-up. It wasn't like that, my father whispered, his voice hoarse. I was trying to protect my son, your brother. I was trying to hold this family together. By breaking the law? I shot back. By letting innocent investors continue to pour their life savings into a Ponzi scheme. Whose family were you protecting then? Silence. The terrible, damning silence of guilt. Mark finally spoke, his voice cracking. I screwed up, Jules. Okay? I screwed up worse than I could ever have imagined. I was going to tell him. I was going to tell everyone, but I was scared. And then it spiraled. I never wanted to drag Dad into it. But you did, I said simply. And he let you. And then both of you tried to drag me into it. I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the room. Isabella Rossi, my lawyer, tells me this report is enough to send both of you to prison. For a long time. My mother let out a strangled sob, clutching my father's arm. This was the moment of truth. The moment where I held all the cards. I could hand the report to the DA and wash my hands of them forever. I could let the system they believed in so fervently have its way with them. The part of me that still remembered the sting of their laughter was screaming for it. Or I could do something else. I picked up the report. I am not going to the authorities, I said. Their heads snapped up, a flicker of disbelief in their eyes. Destroying what's left of this family serves no one. But that doesn't mean there are no consequences. There will be no bailout. There will be no bank check. I slid a different document across the desk. A single page, drafted by Rossi. This is my offer. It is the only offer. I will use my resources to fund the settlement with the civil plaintiffs. Enough to make the lawsuits go away. 2. Keep the investors from being totally wiped out, and to keep you. I looked at Mark, out of the courtroom and away from the State Bar's attention. Enough to keep this report buried forever. Oh, Julian, thank you. My mother breathed. I'm not finished. I said sharply ... In exchange, there are conditions. Non-negotiable. I took a breath. First, Dad, you will dissolve the firm. Immediately, you will retire. Your name will no longer be on any business. All of your personal assets and finances will be placed into a blind trust, managed by a third party of my choosing. For the rest of your life, you are done making financial decisions. My father stared at me, his pride warring with his terror. Second, Mark, you will take an indefinite leave of absence from your firm. You will check yourself into a treatment program for gambling addiction. You will also sign this confession. I slid another paper across the desk. A confession not for the police, but for me. A detailed account of everything he did. Signet indebted. It's my insurance policy. You ever cross a line again, you ever lie to me again, and it gets released. And finally, you will cede control of your finances to the same trust as Dad. You'll get an allowance. A modest one. It was a total surrender. I was demanding they give up the very things they valued most. Their professional identities and their financial control. I was putting them on a leash, a short one. You can't be serious, Mark whispered, aghast. This is a humiliation. No, I said, my voice cold and final. This is a bailout. My business, my terms. You have 1 hour to decide. If you refuse, I walk out that door. I delete this report from my server, and I let you face the consequences of your actions alone. The choice is yours. I turned and walked to the window, my back to them, leaving them to stew in the ruins of the world they had built. The hour that followed was the longest of my life. I stood by the window, pretending to admire the view, while the drama played out behind me. I could hear their frantic whispers, punctuated by my mother's stifled sobs. Mark's voice was sharp with outrage. My father's was a low, broken rumble. They were cycling through the 5 stages of grief right there. In my office, denial, anger, bargaining,